Okay, so let's get right to it. The topic of my talk today will be the current malware situation in Poland, and I'll be speaking about mostly things that our Polish users have been infected with. But not only that, the first topic, as you'll see, will be malware, which was related to Poland in a slightly different way. So my name is Robert Lipovsky. I work in ESET's virus lab, or the Security Research Lab, as it's officially called. I lead a malware research team over there. We deal with all types of malware across different platforms, mostly Windows, of course, but also other desktop platforms such as Linux, OS X, and also mobile platforms, mostly Android. Sometimes I speak at security conferences, such as Virus Bulletin, for example, and you can see that the scope of the things that we talk about is quite broad. This one, for example, is about not too sophisticated, but annoying nevertheless, potentially unwanted applications, all the way to sophisticated rootkits. So the scope of what we are doing is quite broad. I also teach a reverse engineering course at Slovak University of Technology and the Comenius University in Bratysławie. When I'm not at a keyboard, I try to get at least a week of snowboarding during the winter, play guitar a little bit, and I'm also doing my PPL course at the moment. So, but enough about myself. Let me briefly mention the Security Research Lab. Mostly what we do here, the primary objectives and the responsibilities of the virus lab is malware detection, of course, to ensure that our customers are protected and that we detect the malware which we should be detecting. But we also deal with other things as well. I mean, there's lots of automation. I mean, the numbers of samples which we are processing nowadays are 200 or 300,000 unique binaries every single day. So there's automation teams that are taking care of this. And there's also malware research and analysis. So while the detection engineers who are responsible for the detection, they will only spend a couple of tens of seconds up to a couple of minutes per cluster of samples and make sure that it's detected. The malware analysts and researchers have a slightly bigger time frame. They can spend hours up to even days, depending on what we want to find out. And when we're conducting some botnet monitoring, some research, some investigations, we will be the ones taking care of that. And the most interesting pieces will end up in a presentation, such as the one I'm going to be talking about today. So, as far as today's agenda goes, I'll be talking about different categories of malware encountered in Poland. One of the categories will be general crimeware. So I'll take a look at the most statistically prevalent malware families which Polish users have been infected with since the beginning of the year. I'll also look at the increasingly popular topic of APTs and targeted attacks. But I'll only talk about these topics after another one. I put this one in the beginning because it's quite interesting and it's unlike anything which we have encountered before. This is the subject which I mentioned that wasn't targeting Polish users per se, but it was related to Poland. It was a botnet that the attackers used to target the visa granting process for Belarusians wanting to get inside Poland. So enough chit chat. Let's get right to the case of the first one. So, of course, as you all know, if a Belarusian citizen wants to get inside Poland, they need a visa, and if they want to get that visa, they need to set up an appointment at the Polish consulate. Now, the problem is that the number of people who want to get in is much higher than the number of appointments. So this is of course a problem for users who are not quick enough or not tech savvy enough to go on the website. I mean, elderly people and so on, to go on the website and to set up that appointment. And so for this reason, some people saw this as a business opportunity to create various scripts which would automate that setup process for the visa appointments, and then provide the future potential travelers with these appointment slots. Now, of course, this is something which was not desired, and the consulate put several mitigations in place. They said, okay, so it needs to. They banned access from VPNs. Only access from Belarusian's IP address had to were allowed. They introduced CAPTCHAs and all these kinds of things. And that's when criminals stepped up their game, and they moved from simple scripts, which they even publish on various forums. So if you Google, you will be able to find these scripts for setting up those appointments. But they started using botnets for that very same purpose. And according to several sources, we heard that it was pretty impossible to actually get that visa through the regular legitimate way, because all of them were taken because of these criminals. So basically, what was going on? This is the website of that consulate, and this illustration shows the working of the botnet, which the attackers were using to monetize the whole demand for the visas. So on the one hand, we see Belarusians wanting to get visas. On the other, we have the consulate with a limited amount of appointments. And then there's the attacker, who managed to infect computers of other innocent people, formed a botnet. Now, in this stage, these people, they weren't the final targets, of course. They were merely acting as proxies that were used to wait for a command, and once the window for setting up those appointments opened, they would basically DOS the server of the consulate, get all the available appointments. So those ended up in the hands of the attacker, who was then able to sell them to the people who wanted them. Now, as is the case, I mean, cyber criminals, they really like to take advantage of the fact that they have successfully infected a computer. So they will want to make the most out of it. And after a certain number of time, as I mentioned, those proxies in the botnet, they weren't the final target, but they also, the attackers, they also wanted to exploit those infected people. So at a later moment in time, they would even download crypto ransomware on their computer and extort money from them in this way, which was pretty annoying and pretty nasty from them. Let's talk about the way that the people actually became part of the botnet, how they got infected. And throughout all of the examples that I'll be talking about today, I'll be taking a look at both the what and also the how of the infection. So taking a look at the distribution vectors. The most common distribution vector for the Visa botnet, let's call it that, was drive-by downloads. They were mostly using the nuclear exploit pack. But there were also other pretty interesting infection vectors which we have witnessed during our research. And we saw some downloads originating when we were looking at our telemetry. They were originating from various download sites, and they were basically set up under the pretense of an ad. So there was somebody selling a laptop, or somebody selling a couch, and these things, they were in most cases self-extracting archives, which also contained that image and also the infection as well. Or they were some photos of this lady over here, and that particular example was spread on this Russian forum with the link fotki, photographs. The exe file extension should be obvious at first sight. Well, unfortunately for many people, it wasn't. So that was the Visa botnet. Let's take a look at the general crimeware situation and the things which were most prevalent on the computers of Polish users. So again, looking at the distribution vectors for the most widespread malware, as this is not targeted malware, this is mass-spreading malware, so the most common infection techniques are through massively sent out emails, so through spam. We'll also take a look at phishing, which in many cases didn't even need to use malware at all. But let's take a look at the spam campaigns first. So the spam emails, they either directly pointed to the final malware, or something which is more common nowadays, they were first pointing to a Trojan downloader, which acted as a predecessor to the final payload. And one of the most widespread Trojan downloaders this year in this region is Elenochka. Now, it's a general typical Trojan downloader which is used to spread lots of different malware families. And the interesting part is that it was being used across many countries, but Poland was #1 country in terms of detection rates for this Trojan downloader. Also, this Trojan downloader, we were able to observe various waves of attacks. As you can see in this diagram, the attacks, they carry on until the present day. But nowadays it's more widespread. You can't really distinguish the waves that much, as you can see in this timeline from the beginning of the year. And these Elenochka binaries, or these cases, they were being used to spread the CTB locker crypto ransomware. So as you can see, this is one of the emails which led to the infection with that Trojan downloader, which was simply added as an attachment. And if somebody fell for that, they got their computer infected and their files encrypted, with no way of getting them back, save of paying the ransom. Now, looking at our telemetry, as I mentioned, Elenochka is a general Trojan downloader which is used to download different types of malware families. So not only CTB locker, but CTB locker was at least in this period of time at the beginning of the year, mostly being used to spread this crypto ransomware. So you can see the correlation between the detections of Elenochka and the detections of CTB locker around those times. As you can see, the correlation is not one-to-one. So like, for example, here and in this part, Elenochka was being used to spread something different. Being, for example, banking Trojans, particularly Timba. And so with this, I'm moving away from crypto ransomware, or at least CTB locker, and moving towards the most widespread banking Trojans in Poland. So as I said, Timba was spread by Elenochka. Dridex, on the other hand, was not. It was spread by a different Trojan downloader, VBA Trojan downloader, various variants of this. But in effect, the scenario was quite similar. So here are a couple of example emails being used to spread this banking Trojan, written in Polish, of course. Some of them better, some of them worse, which then pointed to the download link of Elenochka in this case. And the interesting thing is that this banking Trojan is extremely prevalent in Poland. We have encountered over 500,000 detection since the beginning of this year. And what is perhaps more interesting is that, again, it's a banking Trojan which is detected in various different countries. But the detections in Poland cover more than half of all the global detections of the Timba, or the tiny banker banking Trojan. With Dridex, the scenario is, as I said, very similar, with the slight difference that the distribution mechanism is different. So it's not using an executable Trojan downloader. Instead, it's using a VBA Trojan downloader, so it's containing some document with enabled VBA scripts, which will effectively download the second part of the malware. And these are the statistics for those VBA downloaders, not for Dritix itself. And again, it was over 500,000 detections since the beginning of the year. So I think most of you know what the banking Trojans are about. In case there's somebody here, I'll quickly go over the functionalities of these banking Trojans. So what they are used to do is manning the browser attacks. So they will be able to inject web injects into the online banking websites, while at the same time not giving themselves away, and meaning that the green bar will remain green, and the user will be tricked into believing that the connection is secure and everything is safe. The web injects, as we have seen evolve over the past couple of years, have been used to do several different things. From simple stuff such as injecting web forms, asking for credit card details, credentials, of course, various one-time passwords, through the instructions how to download the mobile component of the malware, which is required in order to bypass two-factor authentication, all the way to automated transaction scripts, which the most sophisticated web inject scripts are using. So those would enable the attackers not merely just steal the credentials and then manually connect to the victim's bank account, but to automate the whole robbing process. And also, what's interesting when speaking about banking Trojans is that these things are commoditized. So there will be one group developing the banking Trojan. There will be another group developing the web injects, which have evolved to be a universal format, which was started by the Zeus banking Trojan. And they will sell them as a service through various dedicated websites. Timba, the detection name comes from tiny bankers, so the code is really small, and also its capabilities. I mean, it gets the job done, of course. Dritix, in comparison, has a couple of additional functionalities. So apart from that, it can grab cookies and impersonate the browsing session of the victim, act as another Trojan downloader. So through it, it will basically be able to extend the capabilities of the malware, and also steal credentials from various social websites, particularly Facebook. So now let's talk about a campaign which was abusing the Polish Post, Poczta Polska. What do I mean by saying that it was trying to impersonate? Well, the reason is that in the first detected cases, I mean, I don't speak Polish, but my Polish colleagues told me that the Polish in this example isn't very good. If, however, somebody was fooled by this, they would end up having their computer infected and their data encrypted. So another example of crypto ransomware. But these guys, of course, they learned from their mistakes, and in their second attempt, they managed to do it better. This time they got the Polish right. They managed to trick a lot more users. Here is an example of a landing page which they created, which acts, the typical scenario of acting as a tracking website. So if you want to, find out the tracking information for your parcel, you will go here. When the victim enter the CAPTCHA, they would then be led to download a different malware family, SurfStart AD. So what does SurfStart AD do? You can probably guess it. It's another typical Trojan downloader used as a first stage of the infection, leading to different kinds of payloads. But the interesting part about SurfStart is that it also had functionality for denial of service attacks. So according to the configuration file, the attackers were able to send commands for the individual bots in the botnet to start DDoSing websites of their choosing. Okay, now let's talk about the typical phishing, which was not using malware. There were mostly phishing sites targeted at various banks in Poland. I selected an example of Bank Polska, as you can see here. So in this example, it's a typical email, and if you click on that link, it's leading to somewhere else. So unlike the manning the browser attacks, these guys are relying in the fact that people are ignorant of the basic security principles. However, they still manage to get the job done and fool a lot of people. So here's the fake copy of the bank site, phishing the credentials, and then basically not going anywhere after they have stolen them. So enough about general ransomware. Let's talk about cases where the attackers are not trying to infect as many users as possible to get as much money from them as possible, but they have selected very specific targets that they're after. And these targets can either be from corporations or from various state institutions, as we have seen in numerous examples in the past. I'll begin with an older example, Black Energy, which is an example of an older malware family. And last year, we discovered that this malware family was being used to infect various high-profile targets in Ukraine and also various institutions in Poland. You probably heard about this case after our discovery. It got a lot of press coverage in the news, also known as Sandworm. And Black Energy is your typical file stealing cyber espionage Trojan. So its functionality can be expanded through the use of plugins, and it contains or supports all the different kinds of plugins which you would expect from such a Trojan. So there's the file stealing capability, there's capability for taking screenshots, for keylogging, but there are a couple of interesting ones here which I want to drive your attention to, which didn't get that much attention. And let's take a look at the ones which were being used as vectors for either spreading the malware or for gaining backdoor access to the computers. So the zero-day exploit that made this case most famous was 2014 4114, and then 6352, which was actually pretty similar. The basic idea here was that in PowerPoint documents with embedded objects, the executable inf file extension was executed without any warning from the system whatsoever, without any dialog box. And as you know, inf files are executable, so the inf file used by these guys simply registered the Black Energy Trojan downloader for execution and ran it. But this was the most well-known infection vector, but it was not the only one. There were a couple of other interesting ones, such as the joiner plugin, as is a common colloquial term used by Russian malware authors. And this was used to infect existing host files on the victim's hard drive, so using the typical virus spreading mechanism. There was also TeamViewer, which was used to both to get a backdoor access to the infected computer, and also to download additional components of the malware once the system has been compromised, and also in order to enable lateral movement through the network. So speaking of legitimate applications being abused by cyber criminals for spying and distribution of malware, I'll go on a tangent a little bit. So this Potao case is not Polish related, but I think it's extremely interesting. So a couple of words on this one. This was something which we found out during our Potao investigation, which we conducted this year. And during that investigation, we stumbled upon a website, truecryptrussia.ru. And this website, as the name suggests, serves TrueCrypt, the popular encryption software. It's localized into Russian, and in most cases, if you would download the malware, the software from this website, you would be served a legitimate and clean version of TrueCrypt. However, if you were one of the selected targets of the cyber criminals, you would be served TrueCrypt, working TrueCrypt, with something a little extra, with an added bonus in the form of a backdoor hidden in the software, which was activated when you would mount your encrypted drive. So this was the way the attackers were trying to get their hands on the files that their targets were trying to protect. It's a very interesting case. If you're interested, go ahead and check out our white paper on the subject. But back to Poland, let's take a look at Polish agents in the house. By agents, I mean the general detection name for malware. So these were the detection names of these espionage variants. And what do I mean by in the house? Well, I'll get to that. So in this summer, we were testing various new detection techniques, and we stumbled upon this very interesting piece of code. The earliest variants of this were detected in 2003, which was very interesting for us. And then this malware had something of a resurrection this year when we found it targeting very high-profile targets in Ukraine, Slovakia, and also in Poland. So for the Polish part, our systems have reported over tens of detections in an institution with a gov.pl domain. So of course this caught our attention. We started analyzing the malware. What can it do? Well, it has several components. There's a downloader, file stealer, backdoor, and proxy. As you can guess, the downloader is mostly being used to download all the other components onto the system when it is used as the primary spreading mechanism. In the Polish case, the spreading mechanism was a little bit different. So, but about the downloader, it's a typical downloader. The interesting part about it is that is the protocol it uses for data exchange and communication with the CNC server. It's using HTTP, but it's trying to camouflage the traffic by adding a GIF header to the data, trying to sneak under the radar. Let's take a look at the file stealer now. So the file stealer is able to steal various files, similarly to the Black Energy case, which was done by various plugins. In this case, this malware wasn't modular, wasn't using plugins, so it had dedicated binaries taking care of particular jobs. What's interesting about the file stealer is that it does employ encryption and does it well, does it properly. It contains several different encryption keys. So we'll use RC for encrypting all the stolen files while it's trying to exfiltrate them. It will sign that RC4 symmetrically with RSA. It contains several public keys, several RSA keys. Some of them are 1024 bits, while others are 512. So we think that's for compatibility reasons, and some systems in some countries don't allow such strong cryptography, so that enables the malware also to function on those kinds of systems. And then there's the backdoor, which grants access to the attackers, providing a command line and also an additional communication channel to control the malware. also communicates. The primary communication mechanism for the backdoor is again through HTTP with the give headers, as was in the previous module. But the interesting part about this one is that it contains several backup mechanisms. One of the backup mechanisms is an own email client. So in case the first mechanism doesn't work, it will try to exfiltrate the data through SMTP. And even if that doesn't work, I found this mechanism, this technique, the most interesting, because we have not seen this being used by any other malware. And it will sneak in an email message into the Outlook's outgoing folder. So when the user, the users usually have Outlook traffic enabled, obviously. So this is used as the last resort to get the data out of the system. And as you can see here, the way Outlook works is that it will only show the parts of the email which are within the HTML tags, but the malware adds its data after those tags. So all of this will be invisible to the user. So coming towards the end, we have been in contact with the affected institution. We are still working on the case. It's an investigation in process. Hopefully, it will be concluded soon, and I will be able to give you more details about this case. If you're interested in cases such as this one, as well as the others, check out our website, welivesecurity.com, where we try to bring you these kinds of news. So that's it for today, and I think we have some time for questions.
We have time for questions, so are there any questions?
What do you think? What do you think about the reason of popularity for those botnets to be in Poland? Is it that their source lives in Poland, or is Poland the target of those attacks?
Which ones do you mean? From the ones?
The one that over half of the attacks happened in Poland, of all the attacks in the world.
We didn't see any indicators in the malware which would tell away that it had Polish origins, so I don't want to speculate on that. I mean, sometimes when we are doing research, especially in the targeted malware area, we can pinpoint, like, okay, these are techniques used by various Chinese groups, Russian groups, and so on. But that was not the case here, so we have no idea who the authors of the malware are. Why Poland is in over half of the geographical detections? Hard to say.
Another question?
Okay, hello. I would like to answer the question that was asked just before about the Timba. So Timba is one of the banking trojans. And it was commonly used on the attacks on the Polish banks' customers, and it is one of the many malwares. They were using VM, Zeus, Citadel, etc. Timba, it is available. It is possible to buy that malware on the black market. So and it is the tiniest banking trojan I ever seen. It is written in assembler purely. So they probably choose that because it has the lowest detection ratio and it is the smallest. They are not doing well on the Polish market, so they are changing their tools very frequently. So probably it is a new product on the market, and they just choose that to be the efficient way to infect people. So thanks.
Yep, that's interesting. Also, it's interesting to see the most popular banking trojans in different countries. For example, in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, the most prevalent banking trojans are Popras, for example. So it's different from country to country.
Okay, another question?
when looking at the malware in different countries or in general, do you map the occurrences of specific malware in a specific region to the user base awareness? Meaning, Timba was so popular in Poland because someone assumed user awareness to such attacks will be smaller, hence these attacks will be more successful. Do you map the user base to the type of malware used in a specific region?
Yeah, we take a look at such things. However, it's not, in most cases, it's not about the final payload, which is executed on the victim's computer, but it's about the distribution mechanisms. So it doesn't really matter whether it's Timba or something different, but the way the infection vector is what's different. When we're comparing the trends in various different countries or in different regions, I think I would say Poland is typical, average European country. When we're taking a look at, for example, Southeast Asia, where user security awareness is really low, also lots of pirated software is booming. We're spreading really old malware families, spreading through holes which have been patched a long time ago. So such things are very visible in developing regions, for example. And on the other extreme, we have countries such as Japan, for example, with a very high security awareness, where you don't really see that much of those things. And when looking at the tables of the most detected threats, in such countries with the higher level of general security knowledge, it's interesting that there's a lot of potentially unwanted applications which we are detecting on those cases. So those are the trends basically.
Do you have any data available regarding different markets or different regions in the world and the vectors used for infections?
Yeah, if you go to We Live Security, there's a threat report page where we're releasing a monthly report for the most prevalent stuff, so you can check that out there.
We have 5 minutes. Another question? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.